My prediction for this football game was Ohio State 41, Purdue 10. And indeed, Ohio State ended up scoring 41 points, but they held Purdue to 7. The Boilermakers missed 3 field goals, and they got their first score of the day very late in the second half, with 14 minutes and 30 seconds left in the fourth quarter. By then, the game was already out of reach as Ohio State had scored 34 unanswered points in the first 3 quarters. And for Ohio State, they're 6-0. They're 3-0. Ryan Day collected his 51st win. And they're facing Penn State in the Horseshoe this weekend, a game that I intend to talk about tomorrow, hopefully earlier in the day rather than later in the day. But regardless, I want to focus on this game while also talking a little bit about Penn State and some other performances in the Big Ten being mixed in. I know that, shamefully enough, this game was broadcasted on Peacock. I do have a Peacock account, and I was able to get clips of this game and watch some of it live and also watch some highlights. But overall, I was more focused on Michigan facing off against Indiana and other games. Michigan State and Rutgers was another game I paid attention to, especially when Michigan State was up by double digits, and then Michigan State moment, they ended up blowing the lead and Rutgers came back and won. Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State all dominated in Saturday's performance, and for Ohio State it was interesting because there were several new things that we saw. Devin Brown was involved in offensive packages and he rushed for a touchdown. Emeka Egbuka was out. We got to see Brandon Innes collect a 58-yard touchdown reception. We got to see Xavier Johnson more at wide receiver, have him at running back, and also Dallin Hayden had a pretty impressive game. So we got to see, as college football fans, Ohio State fans, regardless, a lot of depth for Ohio State and how deep this team is. And the defense, once again, showed out. They allowed Purdue to move in between the 20s, sometimes in between the 10s, but they were very stout and only allowed their first touchdown, again, in the fourth quarter. Purdue only had 257 total yards, 15 first downs. They had 27 minutes of possession, and yet Hudson Card was 13 of 32 for 126 yards. I'm telling y'all, that Ohio State secondary is one of the best secondaries in America right now. It's very incredible. This Ohio State team still looks like an atypical Ryan Day team, and this is going to be the case for the rest of the year. But there were encouraging signs on defense, offense, and also some things to take note of that could be listed as concerns. But welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's your host, College Football with Sam, and it's getting real now. I mean, it already was real when Ohio State took the road to play Notre Dame, and Michigan traveling to Nebraska and Minnesota, and, Penn State hosting Iowa for the whiteout. We got teases of the October, November slates that we know determine the champions, that sift out the fake and the faux teams from the real, true contenders. And we're getting to that point right now. And Penn State, Ohio State is one of those games. Please like this video and comment down below if you want me to go live for Penn State, Ohio State, because I'm very much considering going live and reacting to the game and doing commentary. And if you're new to the channel, or if you've been here for a while but haven't subscribed yet, please do by clicking that big red subscribe button and also clicking the notification bell so you can get notified when I go live Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, when I upload daily, more often than not multiple times a day, and when I do preview and prediction, reaction, and analysis videos. And also for Ohio State and Michigan fans, I am doing a video about the game this week and what I think about the game, because now we're in the middle of the season. We're getting close to the first ever college football playoff rankings, and it's time to do some mid-season predictions and analysis here for about the rest of October. We're already halfway through October. It's very crazy. And also, if you want to get another source of insight on this coming week's games, make sure to check out my Patreon page via the link in the description. That way, you'll get Potential Power's input. And Potential Power right now is above 500 in the spread, and I'd say it's around 75%, if not slightly higher, in predicting game outcomes. So Potential Power is doing well right now. For those of you who don't know, my subscribers are already probably sick of me explaining this. Potential Power is my own personal grades for positions and coaching staffs, factoring in team talent from 24/7 Sports recruiting rankings, along with points per play margin and yards per point margin to determine which teams are going to win for what matchups and X games. So thank you all for listening, and thank you for supporting the channel. We're trying to hit 20,000 subscribers by the end of the season. Ohio State fans and Michigan fans are the biggest fan bases on this channel. And Ohio State is a big test against Penn State, and we have been gaining some Penn State traction here on this channel. But for Purdue, what the Buckeyes did against Purdue was they went out and they took care of business. This game was never going to be a trap game. I explained that pretty calmly and pretty fluidly in my preview and prediction video. Ohio State put up 486 total yards. They had 2 turnovers. They did not play a perfect game, but still had 24 first downs, led in possession, and the Buckeyes were 8 of 13 on third downs. They were averaging over 10 yards per pass and just barely under 4 yards per rush, and they had 152 rushing yards. Dallan Hayden, he was having a really good game. He averaged just under 7 yards per carry, averaging 6.9 yards per carry, and he had 1 rushing touchdown. Devin Brown had 8 carries for 20 yards, 2.5 yards per carry, and he had 1 rushing touchdown as well. There were things that we saw and players who broke out that we haven't seen all season long. Ohio State did experiment, I would say, in their game against Purdue, and now they have some decisions to make. Ryan Day revealed that really he was planning on redshirting Dallan Hayden this season. But Dallan Hayden, averaging nearly 7 yards per carry, had a rushing touchdown. He adds a new kind of dynamic to the running back room. Ohio State's offensive line, as we've seen against Indiana, against Maryland, at times against Notre Dame, and really in every game they've played in, there have been moments of weakness. And then for Indiana and Maryland, the offensive line was weak for the entire game. Earlier in the season, because I knew Ohio State was going to struggle at tackle, but I didn't anticipate them to struggle at guard and center, I said that Mayan Williams and Chip Trayanum would be better fit for this offensive line than Travion Henderson or Dallan Hayden or Evan Pryor. These running backs who are more speed and space backs rather than, running backs with either a power back twist or pure power backs like Trayanum or Williams are argued to be. But guard has had their own problems, same with center, and same with tackle. The line is better at pass blocking than it is at run blocking, and I think with the issues that Ohio State has had in the trenches, I think having running backs like Henderson and also like Hayden help, because their speed and their athleticism can help compensate for some problems on the offensive line. They can mask weakness. Now, I don't know if stretch or if running the football the way that Ohio State likes to run the football, the way that Ryan Day prefers, I don't know how that'll work against a Penn State defense or a Michigan defense or in a hypothetical matchup an Iowa defense, a Georgia defense. Who knows? Even though Georgia has struggled against the run, I anticipate that they're still one of the best defenses in the country from what I see, the advanced metrics. I don't want to get too off on that tangent. But Ohio State was able to rush for close to 4 yards per carry, just over 150 yards at 152, and they had 2 rushing touchdowns. And this includes, Purdue getting 3 total sacks, most of them on Kyle McCord. So the offensive line still has a lot of work carved out for them. And I'm very curious to see how Penn State's defense does against this Ohio State offense, but also vice versa. Because I think that Ohio State and Penn State's defenses both match up so well with the opposing team's offenses. I think that Penn State's defense would probably, slowly constrict Ohio State's offense just from what I've seen. And I think that Ohio State's defense would do the same, if not worse, to Penn State's offense, just given the fact that Penn State's offense has little to no explosive play. Meanwhile, Ohio State can actually put a big play together, and they do have that higher upside and talent. But I don't want this to be an Ohio State-Penn State preview, even though there will be moments where I am talking about that game, because it's big. And the implications from this game are, we can reflect on those, and it could tell us something about Ohio State's future performance, more so than Penn State's performance against UMass, who fell to 1-6, and Purdue would probably beat UMass by 4 touchdowns. They're not a good football team. Dallan Hayden, he's my player of the game because he came out, and this was his first game that he played in all season. Again, he had 1 reception for -2 yards against Indiana, but really he has not seen action all year, and getting 11 carries for over 50 yards and a touchdown with a long of 19. He's a sophomore. Last year he had 553 rushing yards, averaging 5 yards per carry, and he had 5 rushing touchdowns and also 23 receiving yards. So Ryan Day has a choice with Dallan Hayden. Do you start him? Do you keep him in the running back rotation? I say start him because TreVeyon Henderson was once again held out for precautionary measures in this game, and he led Ohio State in rushing yards and even carries. He had more carries than Chip Trayanum. Mayan Williams did not record a single carry. He had 11 carries. Trayanum had 6. Xavier Johnson had 5. Trayanum averaged only 4.7 yards per carry with a long of 10. Hayden had a long of 19. Johnson had a long of 15. And Johnson and Hayden both averaged around 7 to 8 yards per carry, which is pretty good. And I think they're more slim frame, and the fact that they're more speed and space than they are power, for sure. Trayanum, meanwhile, is this big guy who's going to fall forward for 2 or 3 extra yards, and he's a stud, and he should be utilized. I think he's a better running back than Mayan Williams and a better running back than most Power 5 backs in all of football right now. Ohio State is in a very deep running back room. But he impressed against Purdue. And Mayan Williams has not been performing well this season. TreVeyon Henderson, he right now the staff's trying to keep him healthy because he's that much of an impact player. And if part of keeping a running back healthy is rotating guys so that you don't overwork Henderson or overwork Trayanum. And I think Hayden fits the offensive line well. I think that he has enough athleticism, and his style of football is such that he can mask some of the weaknesses that are apparent on this offensive line. But maybe that's just my opinion, and maybe it's not correct. I mean, Purdue's defense, yet again, is a defense that's very good at getting to the quarterback, and that's about it. But Ohio State's defense, speaking of, like I mentioned earlier, they held Hudson Card to over 4 yards per pass attempt and a 34.8 quarterback efficiency rating. I mean, Ohio State's secondary is one of the better secondaries in the nation, and they're in a conference with, Iowa, Penn State, Michigan, who have near elite to elite secondaries. I mean, the Big Ten right now is so deep, and I typically don't use ESPN's FPI a ton because some of the rankings are wonky, but right now there are 3 Big Ten teams within FPI's top 4. Ohio State's at 1, Penn State's at 3, Michigan's at 4. Georgia and Alabama fell outside of the top 4. They did. Alabama had a bad performance against Arkansas. They don't look good. And Georgia, they only scored, 37 on Vanderbilt, and they allowed 20 points. Not saying that that's the end-all be-all. I think FPI is way too reactive to point spread, which means teams like Tennessee or Oklahoma that run gimmick offenses, same with USC, can just rise in those rankings like it's nothing because of how their offenses work. But nonetheless, Big Ten is extremely deep, and Ohio State, you see the depth that they have and the fact that Dallin Hayden has barely played. He didn't get a single touch at running back before this game, behind Williams, behind Trainum, behind Henderson, and he comes into this game and he looks like a great running back. I mean, Tony Alford has done such a job recruiting and developing those running backs. I think Hayden should get in the rotation because, quite frankly, I think that he will fit, as I've said 1,000 times now, he'll fit the offensive line better. And I think against any team, especially teams that will be able to exploit Ohio State's offensive line issues, I think that his speed it'll help. He'll help Ohio State's offensive line, and it'll help the offense. I think putting him in the game, and that adds another guy to the rotation to keep everyone healthy and everyone, playing at 90 or 100% as opposed to 70 or 80%. I think that'll maximize the team's chances to win. But we'll have to see the decision that Ryan Day makes, because ultimately he knows more than we do about his team, and he'll make the decision that is best for his team. I quickly want to talk about Purdue, and then we'll get back to Ohio State. Injuries are causing Purdue football to crumble. We saw this in that a few of their offensive linemen fell down and had injuries, and overall this team is not like Ohio State one bit in the fact that they're not deep. Purdue's leading receiver was Mershawn Rice, who had 50 receiving yards. TJ Sheffield and Deion Burks were held to practically being non-factors. Deion Burks on the year is averaging 15.5 yards per reception. He averaged 7.3 yards per reception against Ohio State and 4.8 average yards per reception against Iowa. Against Illinois, Wisconsin, Syracuse, Virginia Tech, and Fresno State, he averaged well over 10 yards per reception. And whether it's the fact that Ohio State's secondary is that deep, or the fact that, Purdue really doesn't have X-factor players almost anywhere, and they don't have the depth to compete with Ohio State, so Ohio State can really focus on covering a few specific players and forcing Purdue to change up their schemes. Purdue's not a deep team, and they're in rebuild mode. And Hudson Card throwing for barely over 100 yards with 32 pass attempts. I mean, Ohio State just came in and they wrecked Purdue. Purdue right now, as it stands, is 2-5. They're 1-3 in conference. They're at the bottom of the entire Big Ten West division, along with Illinois. Illinois is 3-4, but also 1-3 in conference, and Purdue is that head-to-head win. And then ahead of Purdue, there's Nebraska, Minnesota, Northwestern, Wisconsin, and Iowa. All of those teams are 500 overall or higher. Only Wisconsin and Iowa have winning conference records in the West Division. That's just nuts. The West is a trash division of football. It's the worst because the Pac-12 and the ACC and the Big 12 don't have divisions. Only the SEC and the Big 10 do. I'm going to say it is the worst region for Power 5 football, and just putting the Big Ten West in a geographic region, which would, include Iowa State as well, even though Iowa State right now has begun to look like a better college football team. The special teams needs work as well. Purdue missed three field goals, and a student of theirs, I think, made 3 field goals in, one of those, halftime games, or maybe it was during an ad break. I forget. But this is a rebuilding year for Purdue. 1 touchdown, 257 yards. I think Ryan Walters is a good head coach. I think he's going to succeed long-term at Purdue. However, not even close to Ohio State. And Jeff Brom took a lot of players, and he took the good assistant coaches from Purdue with him. And also last year, whether it was Aiden O'Connell or whether it was Payne Durham, the star tight end, or Charlie Jones, those were players that were, they were seniors or super seniors. They had no eligibility left. So Purdue is really starting from the bottom on up here. And I think that whether it's next year or 2 years from now, I think this team will be much better. So it's just year 1. If you're a Purdue football fan, yes, this is embarrassing, but rebuilding is painful, but it's very necessary. For Ohio State, getting back to them, they had nearly 500 offensive yards, 6 touchdowns. Hayden and Johnson, I think, need more snaps at the running back position. The run defense, this is something that I wanted to get to. And if not for this subtle reminder on this slide, I might have forgotten to talk about it. Devin Maccabee's a good running back. And Tyrone Tracy, who emerged as Purdue's best running back, was unfortunately out with an injury. Devin Maccabee had a long rush of 21. He had 18 carries for 110 rushing yards. He averaged 6.1 yards per carry. Is that an area of concern for Ohio State? Maryland has rushed for exactly 3 yards per carry. Notre Dame was able to run the football a little bit. Purdue was able to run, in fact, relative to the amount of times that Hudson Card was sacked, which is 3, and the fact that Ohio State had 9 tackles for loss, averaging 3.5 yards per carry against this defense, I think is impressive for Purdue. Is that an area, run defense, that should be marked as a concern? Because Penn State hasn't, this is just an example because this is Ohio State's next game, so I'm going to talk about it. Penn State is rushing for over 200 yards per game, but it's almost, in my mind, one of the slowest and most annoying ways to run the football for over 200 yards. It's 3 or 4 yard carries with no explosiveness. It's just using Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton and occasionally Trey Potts as a battering ram. And no team has had the depth, even close to the depth, that Ohio State and Michigan have overall. And that's including Iowa's defense. Iowa gifted Penn State several short fields. It took forever for Penn State to finally score those 31 points. This is no disrespect to Penn State or even no disrespect to Iowa. I'm just saying that the challenge going into Columbus and facing this Ohio State team is much tougher than facing Iowa, though I'm confident that Penn State can actually go into Columbus and come out with a win, especially when you look at some trends for Ohio State. I think their run defense is great. I think it really employs a very conservative, sometimes too conservative, bend but don't break scheme, which allows you to run, less so pass, but more so run the football in between the 20s. Then you force your opponents to pass in the red zone, you bow up in the red zone, and you force the opponent to kick field goals, or you get turnovers. Ohio State's secondary is one of the best in the country. And I think when you hold a quarterback to completing 40% of his passes, averaging less than 4 yards per pass attempt, that's a mark of a great secondary right there. It really is. But looking at this run defense, Penn State, they have the potential to exploit that. Michigan has the potential to exploit that. So I think that's an interesting area to look out for. Oh, Wisconsin. If Braylon Allen is not fatigued, and if Wisconsin can continue to learn about themselves and their identity on the offensive side of the ball, which with Tanner Mordecai being injured, that's going to be very hard to do. Wisconsin, I think, is probably now a non-factor in discussions about football achievements that matter at this point without Tanner Mordecai at quarterback. And also watching how they played against Iowa it was gross. But answer down below what you think about Ohio State's run defense, because that's something interesting that I didn't exactly expect from Purdue. And Devin Maccabee, I said in the game preview that he'd have to have a good day for Purdue to have a chance, and he did have he had a good day. He really did. But Hudson Card and Purdue's defense and everything else around him just didn't give him any help. And when you miss 3 field goals, that's 9 points. And Purdue drove down initially on Ohio State only to miss their field goal. I mean, that's a lot of momentum that can get sapped away from a team. So the run defense is questions. The pass defense, I think, is just proving that they're one of the best in the country. Hayden and Johnson need more snaps at the running back position. Devin Brown, it would be good to see him in more quarterback design run packages. He has an element of mobility and athleticism that McCord does not have, like we discussed in the preseason. And for him to be in on design quarterback runs, I think will help Ohio State's red zone offense, not just in goal line circumstances, but 4th and 1s, 3rd and shorts, maybe even third and mediums if you really want to set up for a fourth and short run. Who knows? It gives you a wider range of options, more play calls, and play calls that you know can be successful. So those are some things that we saw against Purdue that personally I think would be beneficial to see more of. Again, and I have to say this every video, but this team doesn't remind me of a traditional Ryan Day team. They remind me more of 2021 Michigan. And I think that we'll see some of that in a good way, but also a bad way perhaps against Penn State, because I think whether it's last year or whether it was 2021 and how Ohio State got, gobs of yards on Penn State's defense, their only hope was to play a bend but don't break. They could not shut down. They had no shot of shutting those offenses down at all. They had to score, they had to be aggressive, and defensively they really had to play bend but don't break. That's why the score was 21-16 at the beginning of the fourth quarter last year for Penn State, is they held Ohio State to 4 field goal attempts. And really it could have been 5 if Ryan Day used his timeouts better before halftime. Could have been 5 instead. So for Penn State, their defense has a legitimate chance of shutting this offense down or constricting it. Not in a bend but don't break way, but in a 3-and-out way. Because Maryland was able to do that. Indiana was able to force 3-and-outs. Notre Dame was able to force several 3-and-outs, and Penn State has a better defense than Notre Dame. However, at the same time, Ohio State's offense, I think, has the potential to click and maybe show us some things they have not showed us yet, because they were able to run pretty consistently against Notre Dame. Not for big chunks. They had one explosive play by Henderson and then several 3 or 4 yard runs. And with Devin Brown being in that package and Ohio State showing off some things that maybe they haven't in the season, and also Penn State's, this is the best offense by a mile that Penn State is facing all season long. There's also the potential that Ohio State can take this game and open up the can of worms, and we know that Ohio State's the better team by halftime. Although I would say it's more likely than not this is going to be a low-scoring affair for Ohio State and Penn State. I have not made my prediction yet, but for the Buckeyes, it's time for a tough test. If there are things to learn from Purdue that can be applied against Penn State, it's that offensively, this team can't be afraid to experiment, but they also have to play clean football. They have to be able to run. And defensively, even with concerns on run defense, I would say for Jim Knowles, keep doing what he's doing, because the bend but don't break is working with the talent they have, and it can work like that for the rest of the season as long as the offense has, a pulse to it and has the capability to outpunch opponents, not for the whole game, but to get some explosive plays and to, score 30 points and in the lower 40 points, so on and so forth. And we know the offense has the capability of doing that. But if the secondary for Ohio State can be locked down like they were against Purdue, like they were for a large part against Maryland, especially as the game progressed, Penn State offensively has enough questions where I think making them one-dimensional will exponentially increase your chances of winning. I don't think they are like Oregon or Michigan's offense, or even Washington's. Washington's offense, where I'd say it's impossible to shut down their passing attack, and they do have a good enough O-line to where, Dylan Johnson can run for 5 yards per carry. And Oregon and Michigan are good enough, great enough, maybe even better than that, maybe near elite or elite enough in the passing and rushing attack, where if you turn one of those off and focus on it, then they'll just dominate on the other side. I think Penn State's limited enough on offense to where Ohio State can keep doing what they're doing, and even with some of those concerns, I think that for Ohio State, it's more important to focus on their offense against Penn State, because Penn State's defense, they can score. I mean, I'm serious. They can score touchdowns defensively. You throw them a pick, they have the athleticism, and they'll put themselves in a position to return that for 6. And special teams-wise, Daquan Hardy returned 2 punts, 2 of them. And Penn State has been masterful at forcing turnovers all season, the offensive line and pass protection. If there's a way that Ryan Day can get in an extra tight end or offensive lineman just to provide McCord that much more comfortability in the pocket, Marvin Harrison Jr. will probably still find ways to get open, even against that elite secondary. And Cade Stover's been great as well. So I'm going to watch how Penn State played against UMass and some other Penn State games, and also rewatch some Ohio State film before I make my Penn State-Ohio State preview. But it's time for Ohio State's toughest test of the season. I'm all here for it, and Penn State and Ohio State both did what they should have done this past weekend against Purdue and UMass, respectively. So that's going to be an extremely exciting top 10 matchup. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons, Spencer Bringhurst, my All-American patron, and Noah DDLC, another All-American patron who's recently joined. And thank you for joining my patron. Your support is never expected. It's always appreciated, though, and as a plus, if you're an All-American or Heisman patron, you get bonus content and opinions to help with any picks that you want to make, or even if you just want to see my predictions for maybe some games that I didn't get to cover, you get to see them. And you also get, personalized access. So all good things. No matter what tier you are, though, you will get thanked at the end of every video because your support is always appreciated. So also thanks to my all-conference patrons, Will Loftus, Gabriel Calendar, Roaming Gnome, and Matthew Sale. You 6 patrons and this whole community of you all, my subscribers, you matter so much. So thank you for watching this video, and I will see you all soon. Cannot wait for Penn State and Ohio State and even Michigan and Michigan State. As a Michigan fan, I don't know at this point. Just college football is awesome. Have a good day.